All right, hello and welcome everyone to our second installment in the HUD Grant Fundamentals series. In this module, we're going to be discussing the CDBG program. And this is merely just an overview, a surface level look into what the CDBG program is, what kind of activities can be funded with these sorts of money, and whether or not you, as someone who might be considering applying for these funds, if the projects that you have in mind will work and apply to these funds. So my name is Alex Hoffman Zobel. I am a compliance specialist at the City of Kalamazoo. A lot of my work involves these funds and the compliance end of them. So I'm happy to sit down and talk with you all today about what these dollars might mean for you and how the city could become a partner in your nonprofit to help better support our community. All right, we're going to start by looking at the agenda. We'll be going over what CDBG is, and this is just going to be a very surface level look at the program overall. We'll then move on to CDBG and how it relates to the city of Kalamazoo. From there, we'll talk about some ways that your project might need to apply to these funds before it can be considered eligible. So we'll look at CDBG national objectives as well as eligibility on the whole, like what are our eligible activities that your project might fall under. So with that in mind, let's move into what our timeline is for these HUD grant fundamentals. So right now we're still in our January modules. These are the home program overview, which was done by Julie in the first module, and then the CDBG overview that we're doing right now. From here, we're going to be moving into some more in-depth topics that will give you more of a dialed-in look at what the day-to-day compliance expectations are for these types of funds. So please tune in for those. We're very excited to get into them, but from there, let's move into CDBG. So what is CDBG? CDBG is an entitlement program of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or we usually just refer to it as HUD. The primary objective is the development of viable urban communities. And this is achieved by providing the following, these bullets down below, principally for low and moderate income persons and families. And now when I say principally, it's important to note that for HUD, that means that at a minimum, 70% of the CDBG funds expended should be used to benefit low and moderate income people. Now, for the city, we are a little bit more strict on what we expect from our subrecipients. So we want it to be closer to 100% low income people that are being benefited by these funds. And we do that by focusing our programs in core neighborhoods. And we'll talk about that in more detail later. But sort of when you look at these bullets that are here, the CDBG program, when it's targeting the development of viable urban communities, it's doing so by focusing on decent housing, a suitable living environment, and expanded economic opportunities. So CDBG in Kalamazoo. To give a little bit of a background on this, CDBG is one of the longest running programs of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was established in 1974, and the city of Kalamazoo has operated a CDBG program since the mid-1970s. In fact, the city of Kalamazoo is considered an entitlement community. So what that means is that we're granted CDBG money each year in virtue of our size. So because we are such a large community, the federal government will automatically give us at least some portion of these funds every single year. And you can see that by looking at this sort of graph of our yearly allocations. So as you can see, we're consistently receiving a little bit over 1.5 million each year. That may not seem a lot on the surface if you're someone that's coming from housing. 1.5 million to build affordable housing is sometimes a stretch. But the CDBG program, unlike the home program that Julie had covered in the previous module, has a little bit more variation on what can be accomplished with these funds. So we're not always looking at housing. And oftentimes we are investing a lot of these dollars into programs that go beyond like youth programs, summer camps, economic development programs, things like that. So with that in mind, it's important to talk about how we decide what we want to invest these dollars in. We do this largely by developing a consolidated plan. So a consolidated plan, we're expected to write those by HUD on a periodic basis. That period is usually 5 years. Sometimes it can be extended given circumstances. In this case, our consolidated plan was written in 2019, and we're currently working on writing our new plan right now. The plan itself, it seeks to utilize data from the community and prioritize goals for the next 5 years. So what that means is we'll go into the community, we'll ask people what they believe the needs are. We'll also look at just general data that we get from contracting out, data firms, and from there, we'll write out our plan and basically tell HUD, these are the things that we have discovered are important in our communities, and we plan to focus on those areas by investing in this, this, and this. So when we're writing that consolidated plan, HUD expects our CDBG products to align with those goals we set out in the plan for those next 5 years. So when we wrote our consolidated plan in 2019, there was a large focus on affordable housing. There was a large focus on youth development. And those things are really what has guided our investments for the past 5 years. And that's, it's important to mention now as we're writing our new plan, because as you'll see as we move forward in this presentation, there are a lot more things that CDBG can be applied to, but we need feedback from our community. We need feedback, from sub-recipients, nonprofits, anyone who's working in the community to let us know, hey, these are needs that we see that really need to be met by these funds, and that can really help us develop our new consolidated plan and perhaps expand the ways that we invest that money going forward. So with that in mind, what are our current goals? Well, in our 2019 consolidated plan, we had laid out that given the community feedback we had received, affordable housing, homeless assistance, neighborhood enhancement, youth development, and economic development were the important goals to focus on for those 5 years. When you're looking at things like youth development, what that might mean, that can really be expanded to a lot of things. It could be summer camp programs to help kids sort of avoid that that period of time where they might forget a lot of what they had learned the year before. I forget what that term is off the top of my head, but it's like the summer dip or something like that, where they come back in the fall and they have a bit of a struggle getting back into the swing of things. It could also be investment in sports, building community for young people. It can really be expanded to a lot of things. And, a lot of these topics, as we'll sort of talk about as we go into eligibility, are similar. Depending on, what might qualify, and if there's any concerns about whether or not a program you're considering might qualify or fall under one of these buckets, we're more than happy to talk to you about that if you just reach out to us. I'll include an email at the very end of this presentation that you can use to ask us any questions. If you're unsure whether or not your specific program might fall under something like youth development or neighborhood enhancement, etc. So to sort of continue this talk about plans and how Kalamazoo kind of lays out the ways that we want to use these funds that we're given every year as an entitlement community, the annual action plan is our way to sort of break up the goals that we had set in our consolidated plan to make them more focused on an annual basis. So each year we write an action plan, hence the name annual action plan, and it lays out our strategy. So we say these are the things that in our consolidated plan we said are needs that we need to focus on with these dollars. And now this year, these are the specific programs, activities, ways that we plan to utilize the funds to tackle those long-term goals. So It'll often list, summaries of subrecipients or nonprofits like you might potentially be that we're planning on funding. It's a wealth of information that I highly recommend if you're interested in looking and seeing what we had invested our CDBG dollars in years past. You can go onto our website and click on the action plan link. I have a little screenshot of it right here so you can sort of see what it looks like. And you can see previous year action plans. We also have our CAPER, which is sort of the summary of each year, and it references directly our action plan and our consolidated plan and lists the accomplishments that we had done with those funds. Both of those documents together are really invaluable as a citizen of our community to sort of understand the ways that we are working with HUD to bolster our community and really get these funds where they need to be. So CDBG national objectives. There's kind of two important buckets that your program has to fall into in order to qualify for CDBG funds. And the first of these is the CDBG national objectives. So any eligible activity has to address one of these national objectives. And luckily, this is sort of the easier of the buckets to fall into. So long as as your program, well, as you will see, so long as your program does meet that, this large, wider umbrella, then you sort of tick the box and then you're good to go. This is a bit, of a bit of a wider net to fall into than something than say like your eligible activity, which is much more dialed in and focused on whatever it is that you're planning to do. So with that in mind, the list of the national objectives sort of goes like this. Whatever your program is doing, it has to either benefit low to moderate income persons, prevent or eliminate slums and blighted conditions, or meet an urgent need. Now, to be quite frank, all of our programs are going to be looking to fall into that first bucket. It's going to be very rare, if not completely unlikely, that you will ever fall into 2 and 3, and we'll sort of discuss in these next few slides why that is the case. So to start, the big bucket that all of our programs fall into essentially is benefit low to moderate income persons. As I had referenced earlier in this presentation, we look to really focus the dollars on low income persons specifically. And we do this by making sure that all of our programs fall into one of these 4 categories of eligibility. So low mod area benefit is the first one, and this is really essentially the bucket that everything falls into, because when we write our consolidated plan and when we design our action plan, we are focusing on the core neighborhoods of the city of Kalamazoo, which are neighborhoods that are largely low income areas of our community. So the definition of low mod area benefit is that at least 51% of the residents in an area are considered low to moderate income. So an example of how a program might fall into this bucket is maybe you're developing a community center or improvements to public infrastructure in one of the core neighborhoods. Then our core neighborhoods are largely, the 51% or higher low to moderate income people, and there automatically you've met a national objective of CDBG, and you can tick this off of your list of things that you need to hit in order to qualify. Looking at some of these other ones, low mod limited clientele. In this case, HUD is defining it as 51% of the beneficiaries of your activity have to be low to moderate income persons. So it's not necessarily in a area that's low to moderate income, but maybe it's the rehabilitation of a center for training disabled persons to enable them to live independently. In that case, those disabled persons, if it's 51% or more low to moderate income, then you have ticked that box and you've met the national objective criteria. Low mod housing activities. This would be a case where there is a structure. So we're talking more specifically about a building or something like that that has 3 or more units with 51% or more occupied by low to moderate income residents. If it's less than 3 units, then we were looking for at least one of those units, so like 2 units. One of those units has to be for low to moderate income residents. And then obviously, if it's one, it would be, that one unit has to be for low to moderate income residents. And then when we talk about low mod job creation and retention activities, these are designed to create or retain permanent jobs for low to moderate income residents of our community. At least 51% of those jobs created have to be for low to moderate income residents. So an example might be like a clearance activity. So if there's a site slated for a new business or something along those lines, if it creates jobs, permanent jobs, it would have to give those jobs, or 51% or more of those job positions should be for low to moderate income residents of the city of Kalamazoo. But like I said, largely what we're looking for is all of these funds to be targeted into our core neighborhoods. They're the ones that will benefit and need these funds the most. So almost, all of our activities are going to be ticking off that first box, that low mod area benefit box. So these, I want to mention these other national objectives because they are important to know, but it's not going to be very likely that your program will fall into one of these 2 buckets at all. The first is slum and blight prevention. So HUD defines slum and blight prevention as a change in the physical environment of a deteriorating area. And there's 2 categories of eligibility for this. So there's the area basis and there's the spot basis. Now, it's important to mention that the city of Kalamazoo will never do a slum and blight area basis project because that would require us to define an area of the city as blighted or as a slum, and we just simply will not do that. So on a spot basis, that would be something more like a blighted building, and that could potentially happen. But again, if we're focusing our money on the core neighborhoods, it wouldn't even be necessary for us to define something as blighted. If it's in Edison or something like that, then that already meets a national objective. There isn't anything else that is required. And this one is perhaps the most rare. If not, I would be surprised if we ever met this national objective in our community at all. So this is the urgent need objective. And even across the country, it's rare for something to fall into this bucket. And it's designed for alleviating emergency conditions that have suddenly arisen. So if you look at this criteria here that I have in bullets underneath, the conditions that have arisen within the last 18 months or so, it has to pose a serious and immediate threat to the health or welfare of the community. It's not likely that we'll see something like that. And even if we do see something like that, there are these further considerations that are required in order to check this national objective as well. So we have to show that we are unable to finance the activity on its own and other sources of funding are not available. And that really just makes this an unlikely bucket for our community to ever tick off. So if you're looking to meet a national objective, I highly encourage you to focus your efforts on meeting the benefit to low moderate income persons national objective and not these other 2, the slum and blight prevention or the urgent need. Now, that's the first bucket. Your activity needs to meet one of those. Like I said, they're very wide nets, and so it's not hard. And now we're going to talk about eligible activities, which are more focused to what your program is actually trying to do in the community. Are you building houses? Are you making a youth development program? Are you rehabilitating? This is where we kind of let the rubber hit the road. So we'll start with housing activities. Housing activities can be sort of any of these bullets that I've kind of listed, like rehabilitation of owner-occupied and rental homes, removal of architectural barriers, reconstruction of a home on the same lot, etc. When we're talking about rehabilitation of a home, that does not include activities such as additions of secondary housing units, luxury items like swimming pools, or labor costs for homeowners to rehab their own property. It is also important to note that there are several activities that support the construction of new housing in the city that still qualify under CDBG, even if the actual cost of construction is supported by other resources. So an example of this would be clearance of toxic contaminants of property to be used for the construction of housing. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on all of the examples that might fall under this. So if you have an activity that you think fits here, but you're not sure, I recommend that you reach out to us at our email. You'll see it at the end of the presentation, like I had already said. We want to encourage you to apply for these funds if you really think that you could, make this work and be an asset to our community. And so it's important for you to reach out to us before you start the application so that we can help you figure out whether or not these are the right funds for you. Next is property improvements. So property improvements can cover things like lead-based paint evaluation and remediation, historic preservation, renovation of closed buildings. When we're talking about that first bullet, the lead-based paint evaluation and remediation, it can be undertaken on its own or in conjunction with other rehabilitation projects. So the city has a program that focuses solely on lead-based paint remediation. If you're interested in getting more information on that, we do have a compliance specialist that focuses solely on that, and she's happy to field questions. If you have anything, just send it over to our email. Public facilities. So public facilities, this would be a program that might involve any of these sort of bullets: acquisition, construction, rehabilitation, facilities for persons with special needs, handicap accessibility improvements. It's important to note, though, that this does not include costs of operating or maintaining public facilities or the costs of furnishing and other personal items such as uniforms. So if there's a public facility, maybe like a public pool, it can't be the case that you use CDBG dollars to maybe buy uniforms for lifeguards or something like that. This would only be for some of these activities listed here, or even for paying for the salary of a lifeguard. That's just something important to keep in mind as you're looking at whether or not your public facility program would work with CDBG dollars. Economic development. So economic development can encompass, provision of assistance to profit-motivated businesses to carry out economic development, very wordy, development of commercial buildings, loans to private for-profit businesses, eligible micro enterprises, job training and placement. And this all sounds great. And if you're someone who's interested in economic development, I do want to note before you get too excited that there is a public benefit requirement for economic development activities, meaning the level of public benefit to be derived from the activity must be appropriate given the amount of CDBG assistance being provided. So we can't just give loans to private for-profit businesses for CDBG. Just in general, there has to be this extra piece that's included so that we can show that this money is being used in a utilitarian way in our community. Public services. So public services encompasses all of these things: employment, services, crime prevention, childcare, healthcare services, etc. There are public services that do not qualify. So like political activities, as well as ongoing grants or non-emergency payments to individuals for food, clothing, rent, utilities, or other income payments. Those are considered non-eligible public services. Make sure that just because your activity might involve public services, that it does qualify under HUD specific criteria. If you have any questions about that, we're more than happy to talk about that with you. Real property. Real property includes acquisition, relocation, demolition. Real property acquired, it could be land, it could be air rights, easements, water rights, buildings, and other real property improvements. And we expect that to happen within the CDBG eligible neighborhoods, as I had sort of discussed under the national objectives criteria. All right, so now it's time to get into federal requirements. It's important to note that if you've watched the home module done by Julie in the first iteration of these HUD grant fundamentals, she covered all of these topics, and all of these slides are going to look very similar. The CDBG has a lot of the same federal requirements as home, and so if you've already seen this, you might feel compelled to skip, but these are very important, and it's important to reiterate as we're talking about the CDBG program itself. So recipient of HUD funds, they're required to follow these federal guidelines, and the city is obligated to monitor for compliance. So HUD will monitor us, and we will monitor you to ensure that everyone is remaining compliant with these federal these federal statutes. And to start, we'll talk about primarily religious organizations. Ultimately, what this means is that if you are a primarily religious organization, your activities cannot promote or encourage or even necessitate the participation in your religion. If you are a primarily religious organization and you're not sure where that line is with the program that you want to apply for, please reach out to us to talk about it in more detail. It can be a little blurry at times potentially if if you don't want to get into the weeds and look at the statutes right here, like 24 CFR 92.257. So if you feel like you need some help figuring that out, we're more than happy to talk with you about it. Equal opportunity and fair housing. So the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in the sale or rental of housing because of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. The city expects our subrecipients to have policies and procedures around fair housing. So when we do our monitoring, this is something that we're going to ask for to check to make sure that you're keeping up on. What these laws, they include obligations like taking reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access to programs and activities, as well as taking appropriate steps to ensure effective communication with individuals with disabilities. And all of that we expect to be encompassed within the policies and procedures. Displacement and relocation. We do not want to displace any residents from their homes. And although HUD does allow for relocation, the city does not, as there are additional costs and regulations that come along with that we would rather avoid. Take our CDBG dollars and use it in more direct ways in the community. Property management standards. So HUD requires that property management standards include the following, all of these bulleted things here. What we ultimately expect is that you will have proper occupancy training for administrative staff, fair housing training for administrative staff, real estate licensing to the extent required by Michigan state law, and basic property management training for managerial staff. The city will monitor the projects it funds for quality property management standards, and we expect on-site staff to be knowledgeable of good management standards, even with projects that are not rentals. So, even with things such as construction, compliance with HUD's guidebook, NSPIRE is expected. And you can see, I have it listed here. It's an acronym for that fairly long name, the National Standards for the Physical Inspection of Real Estate. So important to keep in mind if your activity is focusing on anything like that. Violence Against Women Act. So this was put in place to protect victims of domestic abuse. You have to ensure that renters understand their rights. Usually rental projects create an addendum to their lease agreements detailing these protections, and we'll check for that addendum during monitoring. The protections under VAWA, it includes non-discrimination, notification of occupancy right, emergency transfers, confidentiality requirements, lease bifurcation, prohibition on retaliation. All of these things are very important and should be included in policies and procedures. Section 3. Section 3 is a provision meant to offer jobs created by HUD projects to local low-income persons when feasible. So, in brief, any contracting opportunities arising in connection with public housing and other Section 3 projects, they must, to the greatest extent feasible, be given to low and very low income persons before those jobs are given out to anyone else. So, persons with disabilities. Federal law makes it illegal for otherwise qualified individuals with a disability to be excluded from the participation in, denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Quite a mouthful. What this ultimately means is that, again, you need to have policies and procedures related to this in place. This is particularly important in regards to rental units. So if someone moves out of a handicap accessible unit, you need to make sure that as a policy, persons with disabilities who are not in an accessible unit already are given priority to move into that unit first. If there's no one that you're renting to with disabilities ready to move into the accessible unit, you need to go one step further and market that unit before offering it to a person without disabilities. Affirmative marketing. So the city wants to make sure that the projects we're funding are made available to the population that needs them most. This means that we expect an affirmative marketing plan that ensures that you are reaching the greatest number of residents. We intend to review these plans when we do our monitoring to ensure compliance with HUD's regulations. And when we're looking for advertising, community outreach. There's a fair housing poster that you can take and hang up. You can find that under HUD 928.1 right there. Record keeping, tenant selection policies, waiting list policies. All of that ought to be included in your policies and procedures. Prevailing wages. So if there are 12 or more units in your project, we expect contractors and employees to be receiving prevailing wages. You can see here, there's two different natures of labor that sort of fall under this. There's operation. So all maintenance laborers and mechanics should not be paid less than the wages prevailing in our locality. And then with development, laborers and mechanics pursuant to the Davis-Bacon Act should not be paid wages less than what's prevailing in the locality as well. Environmental review and compliance. So all HUD-funded activities must be compliant with the National Environmental Policy Act. Before you even spend $1 on your project, there must be an environmental review done. Environmental reviews are often done in two phases. So there's a tier 1 environmental review, and oftentimes that is sufficient for projects if we know the location where the work is going to be done at the outset. So if you're something like a youth development program and you're doing maybe like a sports team for kids in the summertime, you know exactly where the sports activity is going to take place, and all of that is understood at the outset. We can do a tier 1 environmental review and it can be completed from there. A second tier happens when we're not sure at the outset where the project might take place. So a very simple example is a rehabilitation of housing. So oftentimes when we are giving money to you to start a rehab program in the community, you don't know what houses will need to be rehabbed yet. That's just the nature of a program like that. You don't know whose furnace might go out in a year from, in 6 months from now or something. So what we'll do is we'll do this broad tier 1 just to cover the bases of what we know at the outset of your program. And then as the program starts moving along and you see houses that need a new furnace or something, you complete this tier 2 environmental review. There's a worksheet that's expected to be filled out. You'll send that to us, and then that will ultimately encapsulate the environmental review for that site. It's considered a site-specific environmental review. Now, if that all sounds really complicated and confusing, I don't blame you. We're going to have an entire module on that in this series in May that will go into greater detail on what's required for that. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be very beneficial for anyone, but especially for those who might need to do the tier 2 environmental reviews, because that does have a bit more of a capacity demand on the end of the nonprofit, the subrecipient that's receiving the funds. Conflict of interest. So easy enough, you must have a policy in place that protects your organization from any real or perceived conflict of interest. In brief, as I have written here, you need to maintain a written code of standards, or standards of conduct. Sorry. Additionally, subrecipients should be wary of any real or perceived financial or contractual interests that conflict with HUD policy. And you can see sort of the statutes that demand that of you here under 2 CFR 200 and 570.611. Oh, lead-based paint. So lead-based paint, any unit that was built before the year 1978 has lead-based paint requirements that must be followed. As I had mentioned previously, we have a lead-based paint program here at the city, which you can get more info on by emailing us at the email that'll be at the end of the presentation. But just for now, what's important to understand is that all owners, prospective owners, and tenants of properties older than 1978 must be notified of potential risks from lead-based paint. And you need to abide by the statutes listed under 24 CFR 570.608 and 24 CFR 25 subpart B when it comes to lead-based paint. And that does come with a lot of requirements too, but our compliance specialist who handles lead-based paint is more than happy to talk you through anything that you might be concerned about if your program activity is one that is going to be dealing a lot with homes or older buildings that are built before that 1978 time period. So to recap, does this funding fit my project? Now, as I had mentioned at the outset, CDBG is a bit more of a flexible funding source than home dollars are. So you'll see that a lot more of your program activities that you're considering could potentially fit into this CDBG bucket as opposed to the home bucket, which is much more focused on housing primarily. So when you're looking at these funds and asking yourself whether or not this funding will fit for you, it's important to ask sort of these 4 questions. Do I have the capacity for this kind of funding? Now, to better answer the capacity question, I would recommend tuning in to our March training, and that's going to be on income verification, reporting, and record keeping. That'll deal with a lot more of sort of the day-to-day documentation requirements that are expected of you as a subrecipient. It's important to note, though, that with these federal funds, there comes a degree of labor that as a nonprofit you might not expect if you've only worked with grants that are maybe a little more lax on that sort of thing. So, if you're wondering if you are able to do this, really take a look at everything we're describing in these modules and ask yourself if you have the employees who have the time and the labor capabilities to handle this sort of work. Another question to ask is my project a HUD eligible activity, and does it meet a national objective? So this is something that we had talked about in the presentation. If you have any questions or concerns about whether or not your project aligns with the goals set out, or sorry, if your project is a HUD eligible activity, again, feel free to reach out to us. We're so happy to talk to you about what your plans are, about what you want to do, and whether or not we can assist with HUD funding and getting that work done and creating that value for the city of Kalamazoo. And does my project align with the goals set within the city's consolidated plan? Now, I had listed what our 2019 consolidated plan had set as goals and needs that we are looking to meet within the community. But we are writing our new consolidated plan now. And so if there was something on that list that was not there that you think is important, I highly recommend taking the time to reach out to us, encouraging people in the community to reach out to us to let us know, hey, there is this need here, and we think that these CDBG dollars would be better spread by including that eligible activity in your consolidated plan. This is a great time to do it. If you're watching this after our consolidated plan is written, have no fear. These are just periodical plans, and we will write more in the future. And, you know, as any organic community, the city of Kalamazoo will change over time, and there will be needs that will arise within the next 5 years that, you know, perhaps your program activity will be prepared to meet once we write that new plan. And will my project take place within one of the core neighborhoods? Now, you know, this sort of hails back to that second bullet about whether or not you're meeting a national objective. Just keep in mind that when we are looking to allocate funds to a nonprofit, we are looking at where they are intending to use those funds. And sort of to dial this in, we expect that all of your funds be applied into the core neighborhoods. It's not sufficient to use a portion of the funds in the core neighborhood, but then to also take those funds and use them in, you know, a area of the community that is high income rather than low to moderate income. It has to all be focused in one of the core neighborhoods. So with that, that is the end of the CDBG overview presentation. If you have any additional questions, here is the email address to reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you. We love to see questions, and we want to see more applications because this is such a great funding source. There's a lot of flexibility to it, like I said, over something like the home program, and there's really a lot that can be done. You know, even as far as public services and youth development, those are things that you couldn't get with home dollars. And so this is where we can really start to funnel money into nonprofits that are here to make our community a better place. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you know, all of you in future modules, future applications, taking part in our great community here in the city of Kalamazoo. Have a great day.